to see what these pretty little capsules would do, and so I took some. And boy, did I get stoned. I got lost for 3 days, and I was only a couple of blocks away from home. But that was only the beginning. My friends started collecting appetite depressants, amphetamines, and pills and drugs from their various mothers' medicine cabinets. And then a few weeks later, some of my friends went down and busted into a drugstore and stole a great big jug filled with the strongest barbiturates on the market, Christmas trees. And everybody was sitting around milling and grooving, you know, listening to music. We went downstairs and took one each. I went back upstairs and nothing seemed to happen. I thought, these things are nothing. So I went back downstairs and I took another one. I was eating them like candies. They kind of looked like jelly beans, but finally I turned for the door. Lights were out. It was all over. My friends came to investigate. They tried opening my eyes, feeling my pulse. They poured cold water on me and I wouldn't come around. I just about didn't never come around, but when I did, I never learned my lesson. I went right back to drugs. You know, my parents always said, Brian, hanging around with the wrong people, something wrong is gonna happen. But I thought my parents were just old-fashioned, you know, and so I kept milling and grooving with them kind of people. But at 15 years old, I got mixed up with some real heavy sort of people. The one guy's name was Mike and several others. They opened bootlegging establishments all over Western Canada. Illegal booze, pushing drugs, white slavery, number games, and so on. I helped him out. He offered me a job. Oh, what kind of a job would you say? Oh, maybe delivering coffee and donuts. They always make it sound good, you know. A little thermos of coffee in one end of the bag, and then another couple of donuts in the other, stapled closed, but only one catch, a napkin rolled up in the center of the donuts, filled with opium, cocaine, heroin, and real heavy drugs and narcotics. But this is where it started. It was an early Sunday morning. I had been up all night long. I was tired and sicky. I looked over at the door and one of my friends walked in and knelt down beside the card table as we were playing Stoop. Tommy, one of my buddies. He opened up his hand and there rolled out into the center of his hand was a two-tone capsule. He said, hey Brian, what you need to do is drop this, man. It'll really put you up high. I said, no man, I don't want that monkey on my back. I knew it was a fast addicting drug by the way he was talking. He said, come on, man, it's part of the scene. Get with it, boy. Come on, man. You can take it or leave it, man. You're bigger and tougher than this joint. And he held it in the end of his fingers. I thought, yeah, I can take it or leave it. Sure, man. I could grab that joint, drop it to the floor, and bust it up and watch the breeze blow that little white powder away. Sure, man, and so I took it, but found out I couldn't leave it. It seemed as though the first few minutes my whole insides were going to reverse and come out. But then all of a sudden in about 20-25 minutes when the narcotic broke through into my system, it was like a giant came along and picked me up in his big hand and carried me out and dropped me in the Gulf of Mexico, dipping and sliding, sifting and surfing out with the surf. A lot of people call it nodding out on drugs. Joe Nod. If I stood here and said, man, you can't go up with drugs, I'd be lying to you. I know drugs can take you up, but every time you go up, you come crashing back down. Every time you go out on that tide, you're guaranteed of one thing, that tide, it always comes back in. It did for me in about 6.5 hours. I got into bed. I wanted to sleep it off like I do a hangover or other pills, but I found that I couldn't. I tossed and turned, hot and cold flashes shot through my system. I finally pulled the blankets down and my heart was pounding so fast as though it was going to rip right out of my rib cage. I ran across the floor and picked up the telephone and the blower and I said, hey Tom, man, what'd you give me? I think I'm gonna die. He said, oh, come on, man, cool it. This is your first trip, man. What you need to do is drop another one and kind of even it out. I thought I was gonna die anyway, so why not? And so I did. But inside of 3 days, I had a $60 to a $70 a day habit. You know, when drugs moved in, Brian moved out. I became a stranger to myself. I started doing things that normally I'd never do. I'd walk up to my friends and shake their hands, smile on their face, turn around, stick a knife in their back and walk over top of them and use them just to keep myself in drugs. Even my father and mother, supposedly I loved them, but yet I robbed from my own father and stole from my own mother. I'll never forget the third day I was on my way to make a hit, make a score. I was walking down the west side of the city and I looked as the sun was setting. My face and blonde curly hair was bobbing along in the windows, out and in and up and down. I looked over, I thought, my God, what's happened to me? It happened before I realized what had happened. I remember I looked up at this horrible feeling came over me and I seen the edges of the buildings on both sides of the street. I cried out and screamed and said, God, man, just let them cave in on me and bury me under. I wanted to end it then, but it was too late. A few weeks later and I'd lost, in about 3 or 4 months, about 35 pounds. I remember one night, Friday night, everybody was at a party. I wanted to run. I could feel the tide was about ready to come crashing back down. run from my mother, my father, run from the doctors, the lawyers.